In this video I'm going to paint a simple forest scene with a path going down into the distance. Lots of green obviously. I've put in some shadows to lead the eye into the far distance where I've placed a really simple figure. I'm using a very limited color palette and a lot of dry brushing. I'll start with a very basic sketch and I'm not going to go into much detail. I just want to put some lines where the major shapes are, for example the road, the trees, the horizon line. And I'm speeding this up a bit because this isn't really about the drawing, this is just showing you how loose and simple a sketch can be for watercolors. It's really just giving me an indication of where I need to put the pigment, maybe where I need to leave out some highlights. I do like to sketch in my tree trunks, because I always get a little bit carried away when I just use a brush, so I want at least to have some lines to follow. Now the reason I didn't put any masking tape around this is because I want to emphasize that this is a fairly loose painting and it's a sketch, it's in my sketchbook, so sometimes having no masking tape will just kind of give it a really nice and rough feel around the edges, rough around the edges, surprise surprise. I've already started painting the sky. I started with a very weak raw sienna wash and just blotted out some clouds, just so that the clouds aren't on white paper. I'd like to give this one a little bit of atmosphere. And then straight in with my sky color, it's just a cerulean blue, maybe a touch of cobalt. I tend to use the same colors for my blue skies because I'm living in Australia and that's usually what the sky kind of looks like. It's a good general sky color I've got there. And then I just strengthen the top of the page a little bit. I've also blocked in my road with a bit of raw sienna and a bit of the cerulean blue just to grade down, and now I'm just dropping in a bit stronger pigment, giving it more saturation towards the front, and then it's lighter as it vanishes into the distance. Adding some burnt sienna, a bit of ultramarine blue. And while this road is nice and wet, this is always a good time to drop in darker pigments. They will diffuse, they will dry a lot lighter, but gives it a bit of texture. And then I'll continue straight on with my left side of the road, and I'm using quinacridone gold. You can see how strong this pigment is. It's lovely and warm because the sun's coming from the right hand side. So the point here is to make that left side of the road a lot warmer, that's being drenched in sunlight. And then I add in some blue into my quinacridone gold mix and just keep continuing. This is the first wash, and as you know by now, I like to keep that very loose and wet. But because I don't want to spend too much time on this painting, I'm not going to do a really light first wash and then let that dry and then glaze over it with a mid and a stronger value. I try and achieve my mid values as part of this first wash. This is a good habit to have when you go paint outdoors or want to do quick sketches. That saves you drying time to move straight from the lightest value into your mid values, and also gives you this lovely wet and wet feel. Moving on to the right side of the road, and I'm making that a bit cooler. So I've just mixed a cooler green, added a bit more ultramarine into it, because that's the shadow side of the road. And then strengthen that value and keep a variety of colors, of hues, and then warming it up as I get further up. as the sunlight starts to hit it. Now the sky hasn't completely dried yet. Some of that blue is still damp, so I'm dropping in my lighter foliage, and that's quinacridone gold again, because that has this really lovely sun-drenched feeling to it. Now I've dried my painting, and it still has dried, probably a bit lighter than I would have liked in the mid values, but that's okay. That's the purpose of doing exercises and doing paintings. We learn every time. I'm now painting in the distant mountain. It's a bit too strong because this is now wet on dry, so it won't dry quite as light as the first wash. So I'm just lighting that up with a bit of clean water, and I'm cutting around the left and right side of the road just to make sure that I keep the shapes nicely separated. Mixing a fairly strong green now. That is definitely a mid value, probably a 5 or a 6 on the value scale. And then I paint in the shrubs and the bushes. You can see I'm squashing my brush there just to get a rough edge on my brush so that it's not pointy. It helps me paint leaves and textures. Putting in a bit of red, or actually quinacridone rose, into that green. Complementary colors, they cancel each other out, so that's a way to reduce the intensity of the color and turn it more into a neutral color, and making it darker as well. And I'm just slowly building up the value and textures of those trees and bushes. I'm using a smaller brush now just to make some connecting lines, hinting at some tree trunks, or yes, they're more saplings than trees really. They're pretty fine. And while I've got that small brush, I'll add a bit of details to the edge of the road. And on that corner part there, I have added a bit more of the quinacridone gold back into my green, just to warm it up a little bit and just to get some variation really. The coolest and darkest part of this painting should be that front right hand side that I'm working on now. That's where there's the least amount of sunlight. Now I'm adding a few shadows at the bottom of those trees with even darker value, and then here comes those taller trees, same color mix. I just keep varying a little bit, adding a bit more quinacridone gold, a little bit more ultramarine blue, just to keep a nice variation, and making sure I leave some gaps so that that underlying first wash can shine through. That gives us that feeling of foliage and leaves. And with my palette knife, I'm going to go and scrape out some tree trunks and some grasses. Time to paint those trees on the left hand side. That is a warm and light mix of raw sienna with some of the green that are already on my palette. And I'm just going to do a bit of dry brushing there as well. Try and be quite loose with it, but this is where those pencil lines come in handy. I still don't exactly follow them, but at least I sort of know where roughly the trees should be going. I'm using my Chinese calligraphy brush for this. That's why I'm holding it quite upright. That gives me a lot of control. Lovely organic lines. Adding some ultramarine blue, some Van Dyke brown to make that a really dark mix. And while these trees are still wet, I'm dropping in the shadow side so that they can diffuse and blend. And I'm going by feel here, just seeing what it's needed. Also knowing this will going to be drying a lot lighter again, so I might have to go over it in my final pass. Now I'm mixing a really strong green again with a fair amount of quinacridone gold, just to maintain that warmth on the left side where the sun's hitting it. And now I'm brushing in some grass texture. I can use the same brush. As you can see, when I push it down, it separates the bristles, and that gives me a great texture for grasses. With a bit of a darker mix, I'm going to continue on those foreground grasses straight into trees and bushes, and just so that I can pop out those trees a bit, I made that a bit of a darker value. You can see I'm leaving out that left edge of the tree so that we have some contrast there. And now I'm well into dry brush territory because I want to create a lot of rough, random, organic edges, and I keep strengthening that value just by dropping in more blue. Paint around those trees. Just pull out a few tree trunks, a bit more shadow at the bottom of those grasses, and then scratching out a few highlights on those trees again. And now I'm mixing a fairly dark, dry green for my main trees. And I'm lightly brushing over the page, creating texture, a lot of broken edges. This is easily my favorite thing to do when I paint, is to creating those final touches and the dry brush technique. And then as we come closer to the foreground, I add a darker tone and also more mass into those treetops. It can't be too bitsy, otherwise we don't know where to look. So these left hand trees that are close to the viewer need to be a little bit more solid, but I'll get to that in a minute. First I'll have a bit of fun with creating those little clumps of leaves everywhere. Now I'm moving on to the shadow that's been cast across that road. So I'm mixing a value 7 or 8 at the very least with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. I could have opted for a purple potentially, but I feel this is a very earth toned color scheme that I'm going on here, so I'll stick with that. And again, these paintings, these smaller sketch or paintings that are somewhere in between a sketch and a painting, are great to play around with different color schemes. You know, if I was to paint this again, I would probably use a different color. And now I need to add something into my focal point, which is that point in the distance where the road disappears. So I decided to put in a very simple figure that's kind of wandering down that road, maybe on a hike. and again a bit of shadow there. Shadow is always ground little figures, and that's all it takes for a little figure. And to finish it off, I want to add a bit of an accent color in the foreground. This is a technique I picked up from an Australian painter, Herman Pekel. On one of his workshops, he likes to mix either an orange or a turquoise or some unusual color that's not already present in the painting with a bit of white gouache so that it's opaque, and then he uses a fan brush that creates these interesting organic textures there. I don't know, it could be ferns, could be another type of bush, and that just adds a little bit more interest to the foreground. And we're finished with the painting. And because I didn't use any masking tape, I'm just going to put a matte on it. And if you like this painting, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button and leave me a comment. Thanks for watching.